Not $3,000, not a dealer service package, not a quarterly flush subscription. $2, one bottle, 60 seconds at cold start, and across 3 generations of Toyota, Honda, and Mazda engines, that $2 habit has kept timing chains running past 500,000 miles. Not maybe, not under controlled laboratory conditions, not if you also follow 17 other carefully curated steps correctly. 500,000 miles, documented, repeated, confirmed in fleet garages scattered across Japan, while the dealership down your street was printing $3,000 estimates and sliding them across a laminate counter like they were inevitable, like physics, like gravity, like something nobody could have possibly prevented. 99% of Japanese car owners will hand over that money before they ever hear what you are about to learn, because the answer sits inside a $400 billion annual repair industry, and the people collecting that revenue have never once had a single financial reason to tell you the truth. Not one. To understand what this is and why it works, you have to go back to 1970s Japan. The oil crisis had just torn through the global economy like a blade through paper. Toyota and Honda were running internal fleet programs, pushing their own vehicles harder than any retail consumer ever would, logging every failure, every wear pattern, every mechanical death cataloged by its precise root cause. Inside those programs, a team of lubrication engineers, working under the emerging framework being formalized by what would become the Japanese Automotive Standards Organization, the body that would eventually define JASO motor oil specifications for the entire region, made a discovery so fundamental, so operationally simple, that it should have changed everything consumers were ever told about engine longevity. Timing chains, they determined, did not primarily die from accumulated mileage. They did not die from heat cycling. They did not die from age or calendar time or the slow oxidation of metal under stress. They died from seconds. The first 10 to 30 seconds of every cold start, when the oil pump was spinning up from rest and the chain tensioner and upper timing guides were running completely dry, metal contacting metal at 800 to 1200 revolutions per minute before a single drop of pressurized oil reached the upper timing assembly. That was the killer, not the 100,000 miles sitting behind the engine, the 20 seconds sitting directly in front of every single drive. The fix they developed was both behavioral and chemical, a shutdown protocol to preserve oil film distribution before the next start, a startup discipline to protect the chain during the pressure building window, and a specific oil retention strategy that maintained a measurable protective film on the chain assembly even after 8 or more hours sitting cold and untouched in a dark garage. The finding was absorbed entirely into internal factory maintenance protocols. It was documented in engineering language inside organizations that had no consumer-facing communication channel. It was never published for retail owners. It was never translated into a service recommendation. The dealership network was never supposed to tell you, and it never did. Through the 1980s and deep into the 1990s, the proof accumulated in the most unglamorous location imaginable: the handwritten and later typed maintenance logs of Tokyo and Osaka taxi fleets. Fleet managers running dozens of vehicles simultaneously, Toyota Crowns and Honda Accords and early Mazda sedans, clocking extraordinary numbers of kilometers on original engines, original timing chains, no rebuild, no chain replacement, no tensioner swap. Taxi company records from that era showed vehicles surpassing 600,000 kilometers on a single engine, while American cars of similar mechanical architecture were receiving timing chain replacements at 150,000 miles as a matter of routine service. Fleet managers attributed the longevity consistently and specifically to a startup and shutdown protocol so embedded in daily driver habit that it had become essentially invisible. A 30-second idle before shutdown on every warm engine without exception, a disciplined cold start RPM hold below 1,500 for the first full 90 seconds after ignition, and a specific oil additive applied once per oil change cycle that maintained critical chain contact film integrity during the hours of overnight drainback when the engine sat cold. 600,000 kilometers, one engine, no timing chain replacement. The industry called it an anomaly. It was not an anomaly. It was a controlled, repeatable, documented result that had been sitting in a taxi fleet maintenance log for 40 years, while a $400 billion repair empire was constructed entirely on top of consumer ignorance. And the solution had never once required a service bay, a trained technician, or a $3,000 invoice. Then the suppressor arrived with a briefcase and a service menu. Through the 1990s, as Japanese vehicles flooded the North American market and dealer networks expanded aggressively into every suburb and strip mall from California to Connecticut, a new line appeared on dealership service menus that had absolutely no engineering engineering justification. Timing chain inspection and service. Scheduled, billable. Priced consistently between $800 and $1,500 depending on the market. Toyota and Honda manufacturer service bulletins did not list timing chain replacement as a scheduled maintenance item because timing chains are engineered and intended to last the functional life of the engine when the lubrication system performs correctly. Dealers invented the service interval themselves. They built it into diagnostic software. Service advisors were trained to recommend it at specific mileage markers, and owners who had never been told what actually degrades a timing chain handed over the money because the alternative, like standing in a fluorescent lit waiting room and arguing with a uniformed advisor holding a clipboard and a printed estimate, felt impossible, presumptuous, and ultimately pointless. They did not suppress the truth with a memo, they suppressed it with a service schedule and a waiting room chair. The villain operating behind this had both a scale and a mechanism. The global automotive aftermarket generates over $400 billion in annual revenue, with engine repair, drivetrain services, and preventive maintenance packages representing among its highest margin product lines. Inside that machine, one specific industry-wide shift became quietly enormously useful to the repair side of the business. The move toward ultra-low viscosity engine oils, 0W20 formulations pushed partly for corporate average fuel economy compliance and partly through chemical company lobbying of service manual revision committees, carried a secondary consequence that lubrication engineers understood at the molecular level. Thinner oil drains back off upper engine components more rapidly and completely after shutdown. The protective film on the timing chain tensioner, the chain guides, and the individual chain pins collapses faster, with less residual coverage. Cold start metal-on-metal contact duration increases measurably. Wear accumulates on a shorter, more predictable, more commercially useful schedule. Thinner oil, faster drain back, more replacements. The math was deliberate, and the engineers who understood it were not writing consumer articles. The physics were documented in technical literature that never reached a single automotive magazine or dealer training manual. After engine shutdown, the oil film on upper timing components collapses within 4 to 8 hours under gravity and progressive surface tension loss as temperature drops. The next cold start immediately places the timing chain into direct metal contact at idle speed, typically 800 to 1,000 revolutions per minute, for anywhere from 10 to 30 seconds before full oil pressure reaches and coats the upper assembly. Multiply that single event across 1,000 cold starts, which represents roughly 3 years of normal daily driving for most owners, and the cumulative wear on timing chain pins, link plates, and guide surfaces equals the destructive equivalent of tens of thousands of miles of loaded engine operation, concentrated entirely in one component, in complete mechanical silence, every single morning before the engine has even warmed to operating temperature. 1,000 cold starts, 3 years, every single one, a quiet, invisible attack on the one component the dealer charges the most to replace. Independent mechanics who specialized in Japanese imports began documenting the pattern clearly through the 2000s. Specialists running high-mileage Toyota Camrys, Honda CR-Vs, Mazda 6s, and Lexus IS models passed 250,000 miles without timing. Chain intervention shared one consistent variable across their client vehicles. Not oil brand, not dealership loyalty, not geographic climate or driving pattern. A protocol, a cold start discipline practiced without exception. A shutdown habit that took 30 seconds and cost nothing. And those same mechanics servicing dealer-maintained vehicles of the exact same make, model, and production year. Watch them arrive with characteristic cold start chain rattle at 130,000 miles. Right on the invisible replacement schedule the dealer service menu had quietly set in motion years earlier through a mission. 2 identical Camrys, same production year, same mileage on the odometer. One mechanic understood the protocol, the other car was already rattling at idle. Then the second twist struck, and it was uglier than the first. Former dealer service technicians, speaking through automotive trade forums and documented in consumer complaint filings, described the timing chain service itself, the solvent flush, the tensioner inspection, the preventive parts replacement, as a symptomatic treatment applied after the causative damage had already been accumulating silently for years. By the time a tensioner becomes inspectable and measurably worn, by the time a chain exhibits detectable slack at the inspection inspection point, the cold start wear cycle has been running its quiet program for tens of thousands of miles. Replacing the tensioner without addressing the behavioral and chemical cause means the new components begin their own identical countdown on the very first cold start after the service appointment is completed and the invoice is paid. $1,200 for a service that solves precisely nothing, a renewable subscription to the same mechanical failure on a paid installment schedule. The industry knew the causation, and they kept scheduling the treatment anyway. Japanese commercial fleet records spanning the 1990s through the 2010s. Logistics operators running coordinated maintenance programs, taxi companies with standardized driver protocols, rental fleets with documented service histories across dozens of identical vehicles, told the story the dealership network actively avoided telling. Fleet maintenance directors who formalized the protocol across entire vehicle pools documented timing chain inspection results that came back clean across cycle after cycle, vehicle after vehicle, well past the mileage thresholds where privately owned counterparts were already generating repair revenue. The only separating variable between the fleet vehicles and the failed private ones was the protocol, not oil brand, not engine displacement, not driving geography or seasonal temperature. The protocol, applied consistently, protected the chain. Without it, the chain followed a schedule the dealer had been counting on. The cost comparison requires almost no analysis. A timing chain replacement on a typical 4-cylinder Japanese engine runs between $1,800 and $3,200 in combined labor and parts at a United States dealership or independent shop, with complexity and access difficulty on modern compact engine designs pushing costs toward the upper end of that range. The prevention protocol costs between $0 and $3 applied once per oil change. A small bottle of ZDDP enriched oil additive, a compound that elevates the zinc dialkyl dithiophosphate content of the engine oil film on ferrous metal surfaces, maintaining anti-wear protection on chain pins and guide contact faces during the cold start starvation window, and reducing drainback film collapse during overnight engine off periods. That is the $2 answer. Here's the complete protocol assembled for the first time as a coherent consumer-facing system from Japanese fleet maintenance discipline, JASO, lubrication engineering standards, and 4 decades of independent mechanical observation that the industry never bothered to connect. Step 1. On every cold start without exception, hold engine RPM below 1,500 for the first 60 to 90 seconds. Let oil pressure fully build. Let the film reach the upper timing assembly before any load is applied. Step 2. On any drive exceeding 20 minutes duration, allow the warm engine to idle for 30 full seconds before shutdown. This stabilizes oil film distribution across upper components and slows drainback initiation. Step 3. On pre-2010 Japanese engines originally specified and calibrated around thicker oil formulations, use 5W30 instead of 0W20 to preserve superior cold film retention on timing chain contact surfaces. Step 4. Add a ZDDP fortified oil treatment, available in 4-ounce bottles for under $3 at any auto parts retailer, at every single oil change, once per cycle, poured directly into the sump before startup. Step 5. Never exceed 5,000 miles between oil changes on timing chain critical Japanese 4-cylinder engines, regardless of what the electronic oil life monitor claims. Step 6. If a metallic rattle appears on cold start and vanishes after 30 seconds of running, the tensioner is already mechanically compromised. Act immediately that morning, not at the next scheduled appointment. Every single one of these steps was always available to you in the owner's manual, in JASO oil specification documents, in fleet maintenance records that existed in filing cabinets in Osaka, in SAE technical papers on engine cold start tribology published in journals no consumer publication ever referenced. The industry did not store the information in a locked vault. They concealed it by ensuring that no single voice, no single publication, no single service training curriculum ever assembled these pieces into a system a regular person could actually use. The protocol was never truly secret. It was simply never assembled for someone like you. Until right now. 4 completely independent lines of evidence: Toyota and Honda internal fleet programs from the 1970s, commercial taxi and logistics fleet maintenance logs from the 1980s and 1990s, independent specialist mechanic case records from the 2000s, and lubrication engineering literature spanning 4 unconnected decades, all converged on an identical protocol without any coordination between sources. 4 sources, 4 decades, 1 conclusion repeated without variation. The industry did not need to coordinate the suppression actively or conspiratorially. They needed only for every source to remain in its professional lane, speaking its own technical language to its own narrow audience, never translating downward to the person standing in the dealership waiting room. Engineers published in journals, fleet managers protected operational advantage, mechanics learned through repetition, but had no broadcast platform, and the $400 billion machine required only that the silence between those lanes hold. It held for 40 years. Tomorrow morning, when the engine is stone cold and the oil has been sitting undisturbed overnight, gravity pulling every protective molecule downward away from the timing assembly, you will know exactly what is happening in the first 30 seconds after ignition fires. You will know what drain back means at the chain tensioner. You will know what 10 seconds of metal-on-metal contact at 900 revolutions per minute costs when it happens 1,000 times. You will hold the revolutions per minute below 1,500. You will let the pressure climb. You will have a $3 bottle already sitting on the workbench beside the oil filter, and the most reliably profitable single failure in the Japanese car service industry will no longer belong to them. Not $3,000, not a dealer appointment, not a subscription service, $2. And the industry's most profitable failure mode just became yours to prevent.